Good evening, everyone. We are back in Daniel chapter 2. We're towards the end of this chapter. Just a quick recap. We have seen how Daniel came to speak to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, remember, Nebuchadnezzar is an awful king, a brutal king, and was set out a decree to kill or execute all his sages, all those wise men who were advising him because they were not able to tell him his dream and then explain to him. And we had the text that we have read that Daniel himself did just that. Now, in verse 45, just where we left off the last time, I just want to draw your attention to the final words that Daniel had said to the king. Daniel had said that the great God, now this one is the great Elah. The Aramaic word here is Elah. The great God, and this would be the God of the heavens. Elah Shemayim, Shemaiah, have made known to the king. Have made known literally means let the king know or cause the king to know what will take place. And then it says here, in the future. Now we've been looking at this word before. The word in the future would be after this. Now the word after this means after the events that has been described as an explanation of his dream. After Babylon, what else is going to happen? And so we have that image that the king had dreamt and Daniel had explained to him. And I pointed out that what is important is Babylon is going to come to an end. Babylon will end. That is what God's message is for Nebuchadnezzar. He is the greatest, he's the head of gold, but it will end. It will end. And bear that in mind because no king, especially when they are at the height of their reign, would like these kinds of messaging. And Daniel says his dream is certain. The dream is certain means the dream is true. This is the idea. The dream is true. The dream is the truth. The dream is reliable. So these are two words that are very similar. It's interpretation, trustworthy. Now, the word trustworthy is firm, and firm means reliable. It comes from the Hebrew word uh, aman. In the Aramaic, it's the same, where we get the word amen in the closing of the prayer. These are two words which is talking about the same thing, basically telling the king that everything that Daniel has said is certain. And the dream that he had dreamed has a message. The message is from the great God, the God of heaven, the Elah Hashemaiah, or the Eloah Hashemayim in the Hebrew. And everything that he has is certain. Now, at this point in time, we need to understand that Daniel had constantly reminded the king that it is the God of the heavens that is giving him a message, not even to Daniel. He's given the king, but now God has told Daniel to explain to him what the dream actually meant. We now come to verse 46. Now, in verse 46, bear in mind this word then here literally means right after, right? Right after. Right after Daniel ended his speech of the interpretation of that dream, King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and paid humble respect to Daniel and gave orders to present to him an offering and incense. Now, this is where we need to understand. The first one is fell on his face. The next one is paid humble respect. This is the Eastern way where when somebody acknowledges that uh, someone who is more superior is in his presence, like a person when he comes into the presence of the king, for example, will bow down, but in this case, he bows down with his face on the ground. So he fell on his face. We can see it this way that he is on his knees and the head is on the ground, and that would be bowing with face to the ground. Please bear in mind, this is an important posture. This is what they call fall on face to the ground. This is a very common practice. Now, it is common, particularly when you're not the king. But in this case, it is a king, Nebuchadnezzar, the awful king, reacted to Daniel having finished his speech. And he is totally shocked that Daniel was able to not only tell him his dream, but to make sense out of everything that he dreamt. And all the messaging was according to God. But in his normal human reaction, he actually thought that Daniel was a god. So the first thing he did was to fall on his face. And the second thing he did was he paid homage. Now, this is important. This word is sagit. Sagit. Now, it is a very similar word in the Hebrew. In the Aramaic, sagit means to pay homage. Pay homage means that he's treating Daniel as superior. Now, this is important. Treating Daniel as superior, meaning he considers Daniel extraordinary. No matter what Daniel has said concerning the great God has shown him, he treats Daniel as the one who has a supernatural ability to know dreams. And in that culture, anyone who knows dreams is really not human, it's superhuman. And these are the postures: pay homage. And he could be bowing down and adoring. So treating Daniel as God. Now, what we have here in the next phrase that he prepares, gave order is to prepare, and he prepares to make an offering and then an incense. Now, this word incense is not quite the word that is supposed to be. Uh, this word incense literally means uh, a sweet odor to appease. We see this word in the book of Leviticus. Each time when you make an olah, a burnt offering, each of the offerings that you burn, the fat, the meat, the aroma, the smoke that goes up, uh, appeases God, and is equivalent to the word nihoak, which is to make an offering where the smell, the sweet smell, will rise up. And so an incense is a possible translation, but just know that these are actions that somebody does when you are going to adore, pay homage to a god. In the book of Leviticus, it's for the people who comes to the tabernacle and the temple to approach God. And so Nebuchadnezzar is so taken aback by Daniel, wants to treat him as God. That's basically what we read in verse 46. And now in verse 47, we find that there is, I guess we can say there are a number of missing pieces of conversation in between 46 and 47. Because it says here, the king answered Daniel and said, when he answers Daniel, it means that Daniel had said something. So, what is that something that Daniel had said? We can only surmise, we can only infer, but given whatever the king now says, I think it can be quite clear. The king replied Daniel and said, your God is truly God of gods, Lord of kings, or Master of kings. It says here, revealer of secrets. Since you have been able to reveal this secret. And so, what can we infer from the reply of King Nebuchadnezzar? We can very clearly understand that Daniel had rejected all this. Remember, Daniel is a very Torah compliant young man. Now in his 20s, he rejected the king that all these offerings and incense should not be done to him. He is merely a human being. The dream and the interpretation of the dream was really given by his God, the great God. And so, if anything were to be done as an adoration and a homage, it should be to God, Daniel's God, because Daniel's God is unlike other gods. Daniel's God reveals secrets. Secrets means things that nobody knows, like the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. God knows, and God revealed it to Daniel. So the description here, we have this, that your God is a God of gods, the God over all gods. And then he is a Lord of kings. He is the master of kings. Now, the word master of kings really means that he is uh, a domineering one, the one who is above the kings. You can say that, or the king of kings. Then it says he is able to reveal secrets. And that is what Nebuchadnezzar had asked everyone to tell him, what does the dream mean? But first, tell me the dream. And so the sages kept telling him, no human flesh and blood will ever know dreams. It belongs to the dimension beyond human flesh and blood. And so when Daniel was able to do that, that's why the king reacted that he must be God. But here in between, Daniel had said, no, I am not God. And just worship God alone and adore God alone. So it says, Since you have been able to reveal this secret, it must come from your God. And your God is truly the God of all gods, not just a God to the Babylonian king, that in this awful king's mind, he would have thought that, well, no, the God of Daniel is just another God. But no, the God of Daniel is the one true God. Verse 48. Now, this word then literally means afterwards. Now, you notice that in the Aramaic, we don't have the usual Hebrew and then narrative. These are really words that's worded into the Aramaic text. After verse 47, the king really promoted Daniel. Now, this word promote is important. This word literally means elevated. Elevated means gave Daniel a higher position, made him greater, rewarded him, gave him many great gifts. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon. Now, this word, the ruler, really means that he has the ability to have power. He has power over the province of Babylon. This word province, I think it may be better understood as a a district, and some translations talks about the district or a certain part of a land of Babylon, and then made him the chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Chief prefect means he was the chief official. Now, this means that he is now accorded, right after this episode, a very, very high position. And this was a reward because of what he had demonstrated to the king, but at the same time had introduced the king to his God, the God of gods, the King of kings, the revealer of secrets, the God of the skies, the God of the heavens. Then in verse 49, we come to the end of chapter 2. Daniel made a request to the king. And in this request to the king, really means that he is thinking of this piece of work that he has to do. And this piece of work being the prefect over all the wise men of Babylon, over the entire land of Babylonia. That's a lot of work for one person. And so he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, which is the first one. As a ruler, they would be in the administration. The reason being is Daniel wanted to be at the king's court. The king's, well, the actual word here is the king's gate or the king's door. And that literally means he is in charge of the king's affairs. I think that would be a better way of looking at it. The king's affairs. Now, this is what Nebuchadnezzar had done. And just imagine the political scenario. The Chaldeans, the local people, were embarrassed. They were killed, or at least many of them were killed. The one that actually was able to do what the king had asked was Daniel, one of the young men from Judah, very small place, and he is one from the exile. And that means that he is a foreigner, right, to the land. And as a foreigner, to be in charge of so many important things, it became an issue to the local leaders. This is a perennial problem, mainly because of sectarianism, of people who are more nationalistic, where they would see that the local people should take the more important jobs over other people that you bring back from other nations. But here, Nebuchadnezzar had a personal experience, and the personal experience led him to reward Daniel. But what was in his mind is important because when we get to chapter 2, it describes to us that this image that he had dreamed is still very vivid in his mind. And as such, we need to bear in mind that this dream had impacted Nebuchadnezzar a lot. We come to Daniel chapter 3. Now, Daniel chapter 3 is not a continuation right after chapter 2. The way that the Aramaic works is that it is not in the same style as the Hebrew narratives. So we're now following a Aramaic narrative, and we need to bear in mind that whatever we have read in chapter 2 and now into chapter 3 is not written by Daniel, but is written by people who are observing Daniel. Could be his friends, could be, but we don't know. But we know for sure that because it was written in the third person, it couldn't have been Daniel. It is related to Daniel. So in chapter 3, verse 1 says, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold. The word statue is image. The same word that was used in his dream. But the one in his dream was not gold. The one in his dream was one that had many parts of different material. The head was gold, the chest and the arms was of silver, the belly was of copper, the thighs was of iron, and then the legs and feet was of iron mixed with miry clay. That would be the vision or the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. Now, if you remember, I had indicated that by saying that after the head of gold, we come to the chest and arms of silver, and the explanation of the dream means that after the golden era of the kingdom of Babylon, there will come another kingdom that will supersede his kingdom. Now, that message must have been fixated in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar. And so in this case, he made the image, but he made the image entirely of gold, not just the head of gold. It was huge. The height was 60 cubits. The width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, Dura is a place, right? A place in the valley, possibly. Now, other Jewish commentators would suggest that this was the same place of Ezekiel 37, the valley of the dry bones. But we will leave it at that as just a comment. When you look at the statue where the height was very tall, this really means that the height of the image was very high and the width of the base is only 6 cubits, very small. What we actually can see or imagine it to be that if it's gold, it is a big and tall image. And as a big and tall image, we should realize that this is going to be easily toppled over. So the dimensions that we have that's given to us is really 6 cubits and 60 cubits tall. Now, this is 1:10, and you find that it can easily topple over. This is possibly because he is trying to take a page from the dream that the image itself is to all represent him. Go, Babylon, verse 2. And Nebuchadnezzar had also sent word to assemble 4 groups of people: the satraps, the prefects, the governors here would be the treasurer. I think that could be a better word to use. The governors, the counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, or rulers, and all the administrators of the provinces to come to the dedication. This is the dedication. Now, the word dedication is really the inauguration. The inauguration. As in most political activities, this is a big event. It is to inaugurate the statue that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had set up. Some people suggested that the face of this statue was himself, but we don't know. And so there's a lot of speculation. So I would suggest that when we study the text of the book of Daniel, that we try to be able to separate what is clearly from the text and what are what we call words and information that is trying to make the text a little bit more dramatic, but it's not in the text itself. Now here we see the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, chief treasurers, all these people and administrators of provinces were assembled for the inauguration of the statue that he had set up. Now, the idea that he has set up literally means he has made to stand. Made to stand. And so the image could be in any other way, but it is one standing up, and they stood before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, the word here, before the statue, literally to stand opposite the statue, and that really means that they are all standing in front of the statue. So this is the front of the statue, not the back of the statue. So the statue would have a front and a back, which means that this would be the face of the statue. And so all these leaders, all the dignitaries are the ones who are here for the inauguration, the dedication, inauguration, the opening of the purpose of this event. Verse 4. Verse 4 begins, and then herald loudly proclaimed. Now, there was a herald call. The herald is an announcement. I think that would be a much better way of looking at it. There was an announcement, and understand that this is a political event. The word loudly proclaim is to call out. This is to call aloud. And so there was this announcement. It was called aloud, and it says this: to you, the command is given, O peoples, nations of all languages, of all tongues, basically. It is commanded to you. And you find that when we have these dignitaries, they are also people from all walks of life, including different languages. We do know that the king of Babylon covers a lot of territory. Verse 5 then tells us, at the moment, now this word moment, at the time, you hear the sound of the horn. Now, this word horn is, I guess you can call it in Hebrew we will call it a shofar. In Hebrew we'll call it a shofar. Now we need to understand that this is in Aramaic, and this word here is karna. Karna comes from the word karen. Karen literally means horns, right? Karen means horns. And so the shofar is a horn of the ram. A karen would be the horn of a particular animal. We were not told. And since this is in Babylon, it could be, an antelope, or it could be a ram of sorts. Then you have the flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, all kinds of musical instruments. Now, we have a list of musical instruments here. So let me just re-explain some of these. The first one would be the horn. The second uh, would be the whistle. The third one is more like well, I guess different people have a different opinion. Uh, but the third one is a harp, so a lyre. The fourth one here is a psaltery, uh, possibly the drums, right? The drums. The psaltery is likely to be string instrument, probably. Bagpipes uh, does not mean bagpipes. It could mean cymbals. So it is a possibility that another translation could be cymbals. These are names that we really don't know for certain, but we do know that they are musical instruments. So it doesn't matter what they are. It's a mixture of wind instrument, drums, cymbals, tambourines, uh, and horns. Now, what is important in this verse would be the next passage. The next passage says this: when you hear, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, has set up. Now, here is where I want to point out to you. This word here, worship, is also from the word sagit. So if you remember, at the end of the chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had fallen down. Remember? He had fallen down. So there is the fall down. And the word here should not be worship. It should mean pay homage. pay homage, adore. And so Nebuchadnezzar wanted to treat Daniel as a god. Now everyone is to pay homage and treat this image as superior, and to fall down and treat this as an Elohim, as Nebuchadnezzar himself, basically. Now, whenever Nebuchadnezzar had come by, you find that the kings would receive adoration from the people. However, he is now, instead of letting people fall down to bow down to him and pay homage to him, he has created an image which comes from his dream that God had given him. And he wants to establish the fact that the kingdom will continue to exist. Because in the dream, his kingdom will come to an end. And perhaps this was one of his ways to symbolically demonstrate that he could perhaps defy the God of heaven in his message to the king. Now, we are speculating here, but nevertheless, he is trying to establish that his kingdom will continue. So we come to verse 6. It says, and who does not, now again, we have these same two words, fall down and worship. And again, these are not the words that I would like. This is the word sagit. This is to pay homage to the idol. Then we see that they shall be immediately cast into the burning furnace of blazing fire. Now, the idea here is not in the middle. The word here is into the interior. Into the interior. So, into the interior of the furnace of blazing fire. It, it can also read it as a fiery burning furnace. That is as good as that. Burning furnace, a fiery furnace. And the focus here is very much on the fire. And the word blazing is to burn. So burning fire. Understand this. The word burning in this case, it is what we call an Aramaic word. It is to kindle, to burn. And it's very much similar to the idea that it is a consuming fire. It is not just burning, but it's supposed to burn to consume and destroy. We come to verse 7. Verse 7 says, therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, and then we have all the list of musical instruments, all the peoples, nations, and languages, then they did exactly what the king wanted, fell down, and this word is sagit, not worship, but pay homage. So it is bow down to the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had set up. So basically what we find is the moment music appears, all of them who were there at the inauguration would have their head to the ground and to bow down to the statue. So this is the adoration and the homage that is given, but not to a human, but to a statue. See, when you do it to a king, it is not a problem. But when you do it to a representation of sorts, then you find that this image is a problem. This constitutes a bowing down to an image which, according to Exodus chapter 20, God says, "You shall not bow down and serve other images." And so, verse 8 becomes the problem. Verse 8 says this: "For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans," remember, the Chaldeans are the ones that's always speaking, they are the locals, they are bolder, they came forward and then they brought charges against the Jews. Now you find that this one in verse 8 means they came forth, and well, I guess this word here, brought charges, is a very tricky word. The the word here literally means to slander, to slander, to be malicious. I guess you can say that. So it's not bringing charges, but it is trying to hurt the Jews. Now, when we talk about the Jews here, you find that this is a word that talks about people who came over from Judah. This is not specifically anyone just yet. And so the challenge here is this: the Jews as a whole would not bow down to the image because it is sacrilegious according to the commands of Jehovah God given to them. No matter where they are, even they are now in Babylon, at a place called Dura, there is not a possibility where the Jews, if they were religious and since they were brought over, they should remember why that they had lost their land, because they were not obedient to God. And so it is no better time to obey God. But this becomes a challenge because if you don't bow down, then you will be thrown into the burning, fiery furnace. There is a threat of a loss of life. But nevertheless, we need to understand it's only the Jews who were the focus of the Chaldeans because they noticed that Jews don't do that. Now, we will take a break here and we will continue in another session from verse 9, because as the narrative builds up in chapter 3, many things happen and we need to pay a closer attention to the Aramaic, which needs to give us a better view of what the text actually says. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.